Hey everybody, I'm back. To update you all on my video silence lately, I have been working 16-hour days for weeks to start a new company. Hopefully, once things are up and running, I can have more free time. I also found a new AI video generation tool that allows me to create substantially better visuals much faster, as even a few minutes of video requires hours to create and edit. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks again for your support of my channel. It does truly mean a lot.
Welcome back to the Influencers series. In our survey of thinkers who shaped the intellectual foundations of the modern world, we now move from the Greek to the Roman sphere of classical antiquity. And the key figure in that transition is Cicero. Born in 106 BCE, Cicero was not just a politician and orator in the late Roman Republic. He was also one of the most important transmitters of Greek philosophy to the Roman world. Through his Latin translations and philosophical writings, Cicero effectively transformed Latin into a literary language capable of expressing sophisticated philosophical ideas. This cultural translation would have enormous consequences centuries later. When Cicero's letters were rediscovered in 1345 by the Italian humanist Petrarch, they helped ignite the intellectual revival we now call the Renaissance. His ideas would later influence the Enlightenment and, ultimately, the political philosophy of the American founding generation. Philosophically, Cicero was eclectic. His thinking combined elements from the traditions of Plato, the Stoics, and the skeptics. More specifically, he was associated with academic skepticism, a tradition influenced by Carneades. However, Cicero also accepted many Stoic ideas, particularly the notion that the universe reflected some form of divine rational order. One of his most famous philosophical works is On the Nature of the Gods, a dialogue examining competing views about the existence and character of divine forces in the cosmos. The book presents three different philosophical positions. Book 1 presents the Epicurean argument, through Valleus, the second presents the Stoic, through Balbus, arguing that the order and structure of the universe imply a divine rational principle, and the third presents the skeptical critique, via Cotta. Interestingly, Cicero ends the dialogue without declaring a final answer. But he does reveal his own leanings when he concludes, "After these words had passed, we separated, the result attained being that Valleus thought Cotta's arguments the truer, while I thought that those of Balbus came nearer to what appeared to be the truth." In other words, Cicero ultimately leans toward the Stoic interpretation of a rational, divine order in the universe. Modern scholars have noted that Cicero's treatment of these debates may not be entirely neutral. Cambridge historian Tim Whitmarsh and the classicist David Sedley both point out that Cicero seems to soften or suppress more radical skeptical or atheist conclusions that existed in earlier philosophical debates. Sedley notes that in On the Nature of the Gods, Cicero never advances fully anti-Stoic arguments and appears to omit the more explicitly atheist conclusions associated with the academic tradition. Whitmarsh also detects a degree of hostility toward Epicurean philosophy. At one point, speaking through the skeptic Cotta, Cicero criticizes the Epicurean position in sharp terms. "Nevertheless, there came to me a little while ago, when I was listening to you, the same feeling that I often had in his case, one of impatience that so much ability should have fallen into such trifling, not to say foolish, beliefs." Cicero's criticism reflects his broader discomfort with Epicurus's rejection of the need for a creator or governing divine force. Yet Cicero was not entirely comfortable with Stoic theology either. Even while leaning toward their vision of cosmic order, he criticized the idea of a personal God actively managing every detail of the universe. In one passage, he raises a striking objection: if a God is resident in the world itself, to rule the stars, govern the seasons, watch the lands and seas, and guard the lives of men, surely this is an oppressive and laborious task. Such a God would be a busy and prying God, one who sees everything, considers everything, and constantly intervenes in human affairs. In later centuries, Cicero would be remembered by Dante in his Inferno, as one of the so-called virtuous pagans. Dante's reasoning was that Cicero's philosophical outlook, especially his form of pantheistic divine order, could be interpreted as broadly compatible with Christian theology. His hostility toward the sensuous philosophy of Epicurus also made his works more acceptable to Christian scribes. This helps explain why so many of Cicero's writings survived the collapse of the ancient world. They were copied and preserved in medieval scriptoria. Among those surviving works, one had an especially profound influence on later political thought, On Duties, written in 44 BCE. In this treatise, Cicero argues that political leadership must always place public justice above personal advantage. Like Plato in the Republic, he insists that ethics and politics cannot be separated. That principle would echo powerfully through the centuries. Thinkers such as John Locke and David Hume drew upon Cicero's moral philosophy. And among the American founders, figures such as John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were deeply familiar with his writings. Jefferson himself acknowledged Cicero's influence when explaining the intellectual origins of the United States Declaration of Independence. The document he wrote was not meant to invent new ideas, but to express principles already widely accepted. As Jefferson put it, this was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject. Harmonizing the sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversation, in letters, printed essays, or in the elementary books of public right, as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney, etc. In this sense, Cicero stands as one of history's great intellectual bridges. He carried Greek philosophy into the Roman world, preserved it for the medieval and Renaissance eras, and helped transmit the ethical and political foundations that would eventually shape modern secular democracy.
Thanks for watching. Please check out the other videos on my channel if history is your thing, and see you next time.